Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Good Books, where we review books of every genre, looking for the best of fun escapist books. And today we're reviewing My Lady Jane. This is a young adult alternate history book. I would say it has a touch of fantasy and a touch of romance, but mostly it's alternate history, so probably genre of fantasy. The plot revolves around the era of right after King Henry VIII. He had 3 kids, 2 of which were female and 1 male child, Edward. Edward being the heir to the throne, but he dies in real history at age about 16, 15, 16, somewhere right around there, and he bequeaths the throne to not one of his sisters, his half-sisters, Mary or Elizabeth, but to his first cousin, Lady Jane Grey. And the history of it goes that she is queen for 9 days, then Mary, her cousin, Edward's half-sister, who the history books call Bloody Mary, seized the throne, beheaded Lady Jane, along with a bunch of other people like Jane's husband and father-in-law and brothers-in-law and a whole bunch of people. I mean, she was called Bloody Mary for a reason. It was off with their head for everybody, it seems like. Anyway, in this book, it centers around Jane, along with Edward, her cousin that was king, and a couple other characters. And it's right at that time frame when, in history, Edward is dying. So it starts out, Edward is dying, and he's trying to figure out what to do with the throne, and then it goes a little bit beyond that. So the true history is Edward dies of tuberculosis, and Bloody Mary takes the throne, and there's a huge amount of religious conflict during England during this time, Catholics versus Protestants. Mary, being Catholic, wanted to kill a bunch of the Protestants, and everybody thought everybody was awful, and it was just a horrible time in history. Okay, so this does alternate history. What makes this interesting is, the author starts out with an idea. That is that, 1, Edward is not going to die. 2, the religious conflict they reframe. So instead it becomes a magical thing. The Catholics in this book basically are normal humans, and the Protestants in this book are shapeshifters. They can turn magically into an animal, a random animal. And just one, not a whole bunch of animals. They can't shapeshift into anything else, but they can turn into a bird or a horse or a dog or something like that. And so what they do is they say, still sticking with the plot, I will talk about the magical abilities in a little bit. So what they have is Edward escapes because he is magical, he flies away, and so he does not die because they use some conspiracy theory here. He wasn't really dying of tuberculosis because plot reasons. So anyway, he escapes. But a lot of the history plays out in that Jane becomes queen, and she's only queen for a short time because Mary wants the throne. And then you get, the conflict of what do they do about this situation. So the book, it says it spends about 2/3 of the book recounting real history with some modifications. And then it does a complete divergence towards the last third of the book on what they do to resolve the situation, although the very end kind of dovetails back into history. So I did really like the alternate history thing going on here and the historical aspects of it, because honestly, I couldn't have told you much about these people, this era. I've heard of Bloody Mary. I certainly knew about the Protestant Catholic conflicts, but the reading this book made me want to do a little bit of research. I actually had to research, okay, did Lady Jane really only serve 9 days as queen? Did Edward really die of tuberculosis? Did, just that kind of superficial, but it made me interested in the history. So I would consider that really good. The alternates, the changes there. So the magical aspect, the idea that Protestants are actually shapeshifters as opposed to being a religious conflict. I really liked that change in this. It did change the way the results were because, people could escape through animal form, that kind of stuff. But mostly it was used to kind of suppress the reality of the religious conflict. So somebody reading this book doesn't feel that they have a stake in it. You don't sit there and come to it as a Catholic and go, the Catholics were right. Or come to it as a Protestant and say the Protestants were obviously right. Instead, it's, shapeshifters and non-shapeshifters. And I'm sorry, but nobody here actually knows in real life a shapeshifter. And so you are not yourself a shapeshifter. So you don't have any of that inherent bias toward or against a group of shapeshifters. And because of that, the religious conflict does not feel like it's something that you as a reader have to take a side on. Instead, it can just be both sides were wrong, and you feel very comfortable saying that. So I liked the way they framed that. Now, it's not 100% true that all shapeshifters were Protestant, because in the end, you find some that historically would never have been Protestant do end up shapeshifting. So it's not 100% one-to-one, but it's close enough. Okay, the other part of this, outside of the fantasy, is the romance. So this is a lighthearted, young adult level romance. And so you don't have anything objectionable in that as far as, the most they get is kissing with tongue and to say they consummated the marriage. That's pretty much the end of that. But it does have, some references, some, hinting at deeper than kissing, so to speak. And, the authors kind of play with that a little bit, like, ooh, he saw her ankle, or the fact that when you shapeshift, you lose your clothes. And so there's some humor going on there and some scandalous moments, that kind of thing. But for the most part, the romance is light and sweet, and you can actually see why the characters fall in love with the other person. They make sacrifices for each other. They grow in respect toward each other, that kind of thing that makes a good romance. It's not all about the physical attraction. It's deeper than that. So I liked that as the romance. Now, everything here is handled very lightheartedly because it is a fantasy and it's got a lot going on, and the romance is not the central part of the story. It would be the B plot, the B thread going on. But it was well done. I really liked the romance. The characters. So I like our main characters. I liked Edward. I liked Lady Jane. I liked her husband, Guilford, known throughout this book as G. I liked some of the more peripheral characters that you come to know. The author did a good job. Most of them are fairly two-dimensional kind of characters, the ones that are not the main characters. But those three that are main characters, you kind of feel you get to know, you see some character growth, especially in Edward, but you also see it in Jane and Guilford. So the idea of being a shapeshifter in this book, you kind of get the impression that to be able to voluntarily shapeshift, you have to have personal growth in understanding yourself. And so the fact that those who do shapeshift are three main characters, you end up seeing that growth as they, come to understand what it is they really want, understand a little bit more about themselves, and you kind of admire that. Edward especially, though, has some character growth. And that is, and there's going to be some spoilers on here, I apologize, but the ending, you really see a character growth on his motives, his awareness of how he rules, and then whether he made a good king or not, and why, and who might be a better ruler if not him. Would it be Jane? Would it be Mary? Would it be somebody else? And so you can see that character growth in him. And that was really good. So I liked that part. The characters were good. The humor. This is going to be hit or miss. There is some aspects of the humor I really liked. And part of that would be just the tone of the whole book. The whole book is very lighthearted, lots of interjections that are meant to be humorous. So for example, Bloody Mary, they comment on her wanting, really enjoying a good flambé of the shapeshifters or that kind of thing. The tone there is very lighthearted. The reality would be really horrific, but the tone of the book makes it, sound amusing. And people don't die in this book. It has a lighthearted tone, so we're not seeing a whole bunch of people dying in this book. Which is good especially for the audience that it's aimed at. I'll get back to the humor in just a second, but one more thing I really liked about this was the pacing. There's plenty of action going on, some adrenaline moments, some fighting in various ways. It kind of has a good rising and falling action throughout to the big climactic scene. And so they did a good job with the pacing and the level of action in this, as opposed to just dialogue and reminiscing exposition. So they did a good job, good balancing of that. Okay, one thing that's kind of neutral in between. So Guilford is a poet. You find this out way at the beginning, and he quotes a lot of Shakespeare in this book, a lot. And I'm saying this is kind of a neutral thing, not a good or a bad. The author at the very end makes note of this and says, yeah, Shakespeare wasn't really written by this time, but maybe a really old Guilford actually wrote all the poetry and gave it to Shakespeare, and Shakespeare wrote it down. He didn't really write it himself. Anyway, Guilford quoting Shakespeare all the time is interesting because it's meant, I think, to be humorous. The problem with that would, again, be maybe the audience. I'm not sure that a 12-year-old or something reading this book would really catch that this is supposed to be Shakespeare and that it's humorous that he is writing the Shakespeare things and thinking, oh yes, that's such a good line. I've got to remember these fantastic lines from Shakespeare. And it's meant to be funny because obviously in real life he didn't write it, but I don't think the audience that this book is aimed at would actually get that humor. Okay, speaking of humor. Okay, I loved the tone. There are some mildly amusing things. I liked the way it, kind of interjected humorous one-liners every once in a while. However, the humor in this is very juvenile. As an adult, a married woman, the constant reference to a honeymoon, for example, that has a special hug it comes across as very juvenile. I mean, this is not how somebody who is an actual adult would ever think about these types of things. This is how a 12-year-old would probably view something like a honeymoon night, okay? Not an adult, okay? And it does this in multiple respects for a lot of things about the humor that you're just like, this is very a juvenile tone, okay? So as an adult reading it, I'm kind of like rolling my eyes a little bit about it because a real person in these situations would not act this way, would not think these things, would not say these things. But again, for the audience that this is written for, this is very appropriate. It just didn't always hit my funny bone. It probably would for a 12-year-old. Okay, dislike. There's a little bit of, some of the humor also is a little bit crude. Not much, not often, but just a little bit sometimes. Again, kind of that juvenile humor. Okay, one of the main things that I dislike, there are narrator interjections. A lot of them, honestly. So here is an example. It's way at the end of the book on page 438. And this is what it says in parentheses. At this point, we as the narrators would just like to say something about the true danger of this situation. We should remind you now that we only promise to tell you an alternate story to the history books that they record. You'll be lucky if you can find a history book that mentions Jane at all, since she's often skipped over in the line of English monarchs. But if you do, that book will say that Lady Jane Grey ruled England for 9 days, was deposed by Mary, and then had her head chopped off. Well, we already know that didn't happen in our tale. Our Jane still has her head. And then it goes on. So this is the narrator talking to the reader. And it does this fairly frequently throughout the book, where it would have a sentence, a paragraph, whatever. Like, for example, they talk about Jane and her husband are going to go on a honeymoon, and then the narrator interjects and basically says, the word honeymoon had not been invented at this time. It would actually have been a retreat or something like that, but we'll use honeymoon because you know what that means. And so on and so forth. So it just interjects there, talking to the reader, and I don't enjoy it when books do that. I don't think it actually adds things to it very well. So there is that. Towards the end, we have a really feminist vibe getting on here, which I thought was really out of place. I really just was not impressed with this particular set of things. It happens a couple of times where you have this modern feminist voice speaking up in an anachronistic way that interjects in a way that isn't realistic, and it just irritated me a little bit. So, for example, okay, towards the end, it says, Edward, again, this is spoilers, Edward advocates his throne in favor of his sister Elizabeth, or in this story, her name is Bess. And it says, at long last, Edward had arrived at the enlightened state of knowing that a woman could do a job as well as a man. Okay, that is so out of place for this story. It's very much modern sentiment shoved into historic fiction. And despite the fact that it's an alternate history, it's way out of place. There's a lot of that too as far as the women's views. I should be included, I should do the same thing as a man, you should not protect me. These would be completely foreign concepts to people actually in history. They do wedding vows, and Lady Jane refuses to say the words that she will obey her husband. Okay, this is a modern feminist take on something that no woman had any problems with in the 1500s. This is not, it's fine to have a modern feminist view. It didn't fit the book. I did not think that it was appropriate. So there is that. Okay, overall, I enjoyed it. It was a fairly easy read, quick for the size that it is. An enjoyable book for alternate history. I liked it. I would recommend it. Now, the audience is definitely the preteen, maybe teen, young adult era readers. So an adult might find it too young, honestly. But if you really like historical fiction and like historical romance, would enjoy something where in history they all die, but in an alternate history there's a happily ever after, then go ahead and read it. I would recommend it. So I am going to give it a recommendation with the caveat that it may not be for an adult audience. Okay, part 2. I'm going to read next. Oh, I didn't say the author of this. My Lady Jane by, it's actually got 3 authors. Cynthia Hand, Brodi Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. So keep in mind that. So Spectres in the Glass House is my second book. This is going to be by Jamie Jo Wright. This is supposed to be a drama, so a literature book, and suspense, I believe. It might be slightly mystery, but I think it's kind of more in the suspense category. It also seems to be maybe a Christian book. I don't know that that makes any big difference, but it's by a Christian publisher. So we'll try that next. That's not my favorite genre, but I hope it's enjoyable anyway.